Evening everyone, nice to see a full room. So my name's Paul Lloyd, I'm one of the directors for Brookson. I'm going to be talking to you the next presentation takes about 35-40 minutes. The last one took about an hour or so because there's quite a few questions, so please do feel free to ask as you go. You don't have to keep them all till the end, so we can have a bit of a discussion on the way through. Makes it a bit more interactive. What I'm going to talk to you about today is a little bit about us, just so you know who we are, that we know what we're talking about, and a little bit of history, credibility around why we're doing this. Some background to IR35, so hopefully you already understand IR35 to a certain extent. It's been around for a long time, and then preparing for the changes that are coming to affect IR35 from April next year. And then a little bit around how we would normally try and say how we can help you, how we can help clients, and help people navigate through the change next year. So, a little bit about Brookson. I suppose the two most important parts of our group of companies are the top two. So the one on your left-hand side has been around for 25 years. We provide accountancy services and an umbrella solution to contractors. So accountancy is we're a contractor-specific accountant, so we're not your traditional high street accountant. We only work with contractors. We look after about 15,000 contractors' accounts at the moment, and we've been doing that for 25 years. We also have a payroll and employment business called an umbrella, which is for contractors that are inside of IR35. So when you come to see the changes in April next year, if you're unfortunate that you get deemed inside, then you need to look for a payroll vehicle, then an umbrella solution is one of those. And I'll talk you through some of the working options a little bit later towards the end of the presentation in terms of the different ways that you can look to work. The company on the right hand side is Brookson Legal, where we offer legislative support and IR35 reviews. So Brookson Legal is an SRA regulated law firm that was founded specifically to look at IR35 and is what it specialises in. We've been doing that for 19 years, so IR35 has been around for 19 years. The people that think it's just coming next year, it's not true. So it was brought in July 2000, and that was the same time that Brookson Legal was formed, and since then we've been giving IR35 reviews to contractors predominantly, and then for the last couple of years we've been doing that in the public sector for end hirers as well. Okay, so a little bit of background to IR35. Hopefully you all understand a little bit about IR35. The reason it was originally brought in back in July of 2000 is that at the time, I think it was Gordon Brown, Chancellor of the Exchequer, felt that there was a lot of non-compliance around people leaving full-time employment on a Friday, going back to do the same job with the same employer on a Monday, but then taking home 20% extra working through a limited company and what he calls avoiding tax. So HMRC call that disguised employees. So if you look like an employee, you're completing the same role as a fixed term employee, or you're filling a role that should be normally a permanent employee, like maternity cover, for example, then you would be extremely high risk of IR35 and likely to be a disguised employee. HMRC believe that anyone that is a disguised employee should be paying tax as an employee, which is PAYE tax and national insurance. So a few numbers around why this was originally brought into force back in 2000. At the time, HMRC estimated that bringing in the change for IR35 back in 2000 would bring them in approximately £300 million a year in tax and national insurance. HMRC are inherently bad at enforcing this piece of legislation. They've not only got to track you down individually, it takes them about 12 months to take you to tribunal once they've done all the investigations into all your assignments and tax affairs. And then normally they lose about 90% of all the cases they take to tribunal. For that reason, between 2002-3 to 2007-8, they actually only recouped about £9.2 million in tax and NI. So when they estimated £300 million a year, they were very bad at enforcing it. So they've had problems with that with IR35 and the way they assess it for a number of years now. And the number of PSCs or personal service companies or limited companies within the UK currently is approximately 650,000. HMRC expect that this change to IR35 next April will mean that recoups about £1.3 billion in tax and national insurance. So for anyone that thinks it's going to get delayed, that's probably the biggest reason why it won't. They've budgeted £1.3 billion to come into the tax accounts next year, so a big reason for them to push this through. The changes came into the public sector in 2017. Has anyone worked in the public sector previously? Show of hands. Yeah, since or before 2017? Since. And did you get told whether you were inside or outside, or did you not get a decision?
Yeah, I got a decision before the contract.
And were you inside or outside?
Outside.
You were outside. Okay, good. So the client looked to do it correctly. Yourself, was it before or afterwards? Need to put your hand up, so.
After.
afterwards?
Outside.
And outside as well. Fantastic. Okay, so that's the sort of answers that you want to hear. The changes in the public sector, what happened in terms of that change was that in 2007, or back in 2016, HMRC ran a consultation to make changes to the way that IR35 or the person that's responsible for assessing IR35. So there isn't a change to how IR35 is assessed. It's been the same for the last 19 years, and it's based on case law and certain tests. There is no change to that. What they did change was the person that's responsible for making that assessment. So currently, any of you that are working in the private sector, you can decide how you work. You can decide to work through your limited company and pay yourself through director salary and dividends in the most tax efficient way. If you're captured from an IR35 point of view, you have to pay PAYE tax, but obviously they've been very bad at enforcing that. So what they did in the public sector was they moved that responsibility up the supply chain, almost like a self-policing mechanism. So what HMRC said is that your end hirer or your client, where you're providing services to, has to make the determination of whether you're inside or outside. So no longer can, if you work in the public sector, can you make the determination. Like the gentleman mentioned, he got given a determination that he was outside. So the client has to make that determination, and they're supposed to take reasonable care within that assessment. There is no guidance yet on reasonable care. 2.5 years into the legislation, it's still very grey and woolly. However, I'll talk a little bit more about that later. The entity or the intermediary that's paying you, normally the recruitment agency, is then responsible for deducting tax and national insurance. So in a normal contractual chain, there'll be your client who makes the determination for an IR35 purpose. If they say you're inside, the agency that's paying you needs to withhold tax and national insurance. So those changes came into effect in the public sector in 2017, and HMRC said that they had no plans to move them into the private sector. In 2018, they changed their tune and said that they were going to pick them up and drop them into the private sector. So that was announced in the autumn statement of 2017. Some of the main issues that we saw in the public sector, and we helped some public sector end high, was that the main one was that they had a lack of time to prepare. So it was announced in the November of 2016, it was implemented as of the 6th of April 2017, so they had a 6-month window to understand IR35, implement any changes and give everyone an assessment. So we did see quite a number of blanket ban decisions where they stopped the use of personal service companies. Two of the biggest and most public examples were NHS through NHSI and Transport for London. They both then retracted that at a later date because they realised they couldn't hire contractors then. It made it very difficult for them to attract talent, so they had to retract that and then go back to assessing on a case-by-case basis. The blanket bans were quite prevalent back in the public sector. We're seeing less of that in the private sector, although there are some industries that are going down a similar sort of route, just with slightly different wording. The financial services sector is probably the one that most people will know about, so the majority of the big banks have already come out and communicated saying that they're going to put everyone down a PAYE route. So they've been careful with how they've worded that. If you read the wording from the banks, it doesn't say we're blanket banning the use of PSCs or we're stopping using PSCs. They said we're changing our engagement model. We'll only engage with you on a PAYE contract from now onwards. So they've changed the way they're wording it so it doesn't sound so much like a blanket ban. They're being a little bit smarter around how they've done that, so it's less open to challenge. Some of those banks are looking to go one step further than that and are saying that you can't use an umbrella company. You have to be payrolled either by them or the agency as well. So it depends who you're working for, can have slightly different rules. There was quite a bit of non-compliance seen within the public sector, and what we mean by that is that when you as a contractor, if you got told that you were now inside of IR35 and you had less take-home pay, you might be tempted to look for a more tax-efficient way of working. The only other tax-efficient way of working is through non-compliant vehicles. You'll all have heard of loan schemes, probably earnings benefits trusts, and there's a few other schemes around like that by putting multiple directors into one limited company and trying to take advantage of certain tax loopholes. They're obviously non-compliant vehicles, and we saw a few of those popping up around the public sector changes. The HMRC have said that they're going to make some changes to the private sector rollout. One of those is to combat that type of thing in terms of non-compliance. Some of them are good points of view as well, and we'll come on to that in a second. I think one of the main issues was that there was a loss of skilled contractors. Obviously, if you're an IT contractor that's working within the public sector and unfortunately you were told you're outside, if you got told you're inside, you could have said, okay, well, I'm going to go and work for a private sector company where this doesn't affect me. You could have just moved sectors and it no longer impacted you. Now, when the rules are the same in both sectors, that won't be possible, but if you're working for a company A and they take a blanket ban approach, you can quite easily go and work for company B that might be taking the right approach in terms of IR35. So there's still that risk for clients around taking the right approach and making sure they do the assessments correctly. We do lots of these talks and events for contractors, agencies and clients, and that's the main thing we talk to clients around, is the loss of talent if they don't do this properly. If they seem to be doing it correct, then there's less chance of them losing the contractors that they need. And the changes in the public sector were very much the dry run for the private sector, and they said in the autumn statement of 2017 they're going to lift and drop the changes from the public sector into the private sector. So that's the starting point, and we'll come on to those changes in a second. So an IR35 status assessment, most of you hopefully have probably had one of these done. You might have had it done by a law firm, insurance company, your accountant, and it is tax legislation, so really it should be done by someone from a legal background. There are three main tests that you would normally look at for IR35. Control, so how much control does the end hirer have over how you complete your work, and that's very much in the manner that you carry out your work. So it's not necessarily saying you have to complete it here. They're saying that they're telling you how to do your job. So the reasons contractors are normally hired is because you're highly skilled and you're bringing in a specialist set of skills to be able to provide services that they don't have from their employees at the moment. So the control will be one part of that, so more of the kind of the how and the what. Personal service or substitution. I imagine all of you have a IR35 friendly contract that has a substitution clause in, but how many of your clients would let you substitute? Unlikely normally. It has to be you, the person, or your business that provides that substitute as well, so it would need to be you that suggests the substitute and you that pays the substitute if that was a true substitution in terms of IR35. And then mutuality of obligation is whether you're mutually obliged to continue giving and receiving work. So if you've just done a 6-month assignment, do you have to then carry on to it? Do you have to be extended? Do you have a long notice period? Those types of things were normally looked at from a mutuality of obligation point. To put that into a little bit of context, me for example, I'm employed by Brookson. I'm controlled to a certain extent of the how, the what, the where, the when, what I say, what I can't say. It has to be me. So even though it's evening in Leeds, I'm here, I can't send my wife, so it has to be me that comes and speaks to you. And mutuality of obligation, I've been working for Brookson for 5 and a bit years. I've got a 6-month notice period. We've got a contract in perpetuity until one of us serves notice on the other. So that's completely different to how you engage with a business. And when you're looking at IR35, you're not necessarily looking to prove that you're self-employed, you're looking to prove that you're not employed. So actually the determination for IR35 is that all 3 of those tests have to apply for you to be employed. If one of those isn't present, then you are not employed, so IR35 doesn't apply. And that's the way that you normally look at IR35 in terms of a review. There's a common misconception you have to pass all 3. You don't, and we talk a little bit about case law on that later on, so you don't have to pass all 3 of them. Most of you won't pass the substitution one, I imagine, in practice. Other factors that we'd normally look at is financial risk, whether you're in business in your own right, and whether you provide your own equipment. So that's much more around whether it's a business-to-business arrangement. So the whole point of engaging with a contractor is that, and the personal service point is that you're engaging business-to-business. So it's a contract between your client, a business, and your PSC, your limited company, a business. It's not you as a person providing that service normally. A perfect example of the other way around, of where there wouldn't be any control, personal service or mutuality of obligation, is I had a garage conversion done 6-12 months ago. I asked a builder in, told him where I wanted the door, where I wanted the window, where I wanted bits and pieces, and then I didn't tell him anything else. He used whoever he wanted to complete those services. He did it whenever he wanted and completed it in the time frame that suited him. And I didn't control them over the how, the what, the where, the when. It was all under their guise, and it was a business to business or a person to a business engaging that. It wasn't me saying to that person, you have to put that brick there or that bit of plaster there. I'm not controlling them in the manner that they carry out their work. So just to try and give you a bit more of an understanding in terms of how an IR35 assessment is normally done. Last bit on that is that the way we do that is through a contract and working practices review. So we wouldn't just look to just review your contract, because actually if your contract states that you can provide a substitute, but in practice you can't, HMRC would take more precedence over the working practices, not over your contract. So what's changing in the private sector? It's due to come into effect as of April next year. One important thing to realise is that it's an implementation date of the 6th of April 2020. So that means it's for any payments after that date. So if you work for the whole of March and then don't get paid until the 7th or afterwards of April, these rules apply. So it's not for work completed afterwards, it's for payments after the 6th of April. And what's main changing? So there's a couple of changes here, and they were to combat some of the issues that we're seeing in the public sector. One of the issues was that contractors weren't very well communicated to, and the supply chain wasn't very well communicated to. So you guys were fortunate that you received a determination before you took the role. Some people didn't get any, the contractors didn't get to see them. So what they're changing in the private sector is that your client is going to have to give a status determination statement. So, and what that is, an SDS, is they have to give a determination whether your role is inside or outside of IR35. They then have to put the reasons why that is inside or outside of IR35. The reason being is that, one, contractors weren't communicated with, and secondly, in the public sector, you had virtually no mechanism to challenge the decision. You had to wait until the year end to claim through your self-assessment tax return, and if you were successful, you could only reclaim the tax, not the national insurance. So there wasn't much of a reclaim mechanism in the public sector change. They're also going to introduce a higher-led challenge process. What that means is that once you receive your status determination statement, if you don't think certain reasons in there are right, then you can go back and challenge that with your end client then as well. So it allows you the ability to go back and challenge the decision. I presume you'll only challenge if it's inside, not if it's outside. So, but if it's inside of IR35, you can go back and obviously challenge that decision. And that should be communicated with the whole supply chain. So the agency and the worker should receive that status determination statement. They introduced a liability flow down the supply chain and back up the supply chain. They're introducing that in the private sector change. The reason they did that was around those non-compliant payroll vehicles that I mentioned before, because there was non-compliant payroll vehicles, there was companies that would say they'd pay you gross, and then when HMRC investigate, they close the company down. They've done that to stop that happening, and we come on to that in a second in terms of a liability flow. The stuff we talk to about clients, so if you're talking to your clients around IR35 and what they should be doing now or trying to get them ready, so the biggest issue we've found from the clients we speak to is that they don't understand it. They've not had, you guys will understand IR35 because you've had to deal with it for all of your contracting career, possibly 19 years, and your end hirer won't understand IR35 in any sort of detail more than likely, unless it's a larger business and they've got legal teams, they're unlikely to understand this. So first they've got to assess their workforce and they've got to make sure that they take reasonable care. So likelihood is they've got to figure out how many contractors they've got. Surprisingly, most clients we speak to actually don't know because they're through different agencies or some are direct and there's lots of different people. They can struggle to assess that to start with, so it can be quite a long drawn out process for them. Obviously they need to communicate with all of the supply chain, and then also they need to decide, and you need to decide how to get paid if you're deemed inside of IR35, which again we come on to later. Time and time again, I hear the same common misconception. People have been told you've been on site for over 2 years, so you're captured from an IR35 point of view. Some of you have probably been told that previously. It's got absolutely nothing to do with IR35. It's to do with tax relief on your expenses. It's the 24-month rule for expenses to a limited company. But so many end hirers I meet say, all my contractors have been on site over 2 years, so they're captured. Nothing to do with it at all. Absolutely nothing to do with it. So the longer someone's on site, the more they look like an employee, but doesn't necessarily mean they're definitely inside of IR35. So just it's an education process with your end hirer more than anything else. So it's good to open up lines of communication as soon as you can. In terms of that liability flow that I mentioned before, I'll move around a little bit so I can talk to that one. Your client needs to pass the status determination statement to the agency in the supply chain and also down to you as a limited company or a personal services company. That's quite a long contract change. Normally it would just be client agency PSC, but this is taken from HMRC's website, so this is the version they used. What it states is that if any person in that supply chain or intermediary in that supply chain doesn't pass the status determination statement down, then they carry the liability. So in this example, it's been passed from client to 1 to 2 to 3. 3 hasn't passed that status determination down, so the liability sits with that entity then. So client intermediary 3 effectively carries the tax liability there. If HMRC come to investigate and they try to reclaim the tax of intermediary 3 and that company no longer exists, or they close the company down, they can't reclaim the tax, they've now put an upwards liability flow in. And this is to stop the non-compliant payroll vehicles that I was talking about. Because they haven't been able to collect the tax from those, they've now put in the legislation that they can move back up the supply chain. And the reason that's probably relevant to you, you're not probably that interested in terms of the contractual chain. Why it's relevant is that if you're using any sort of non-compliant vehicle, or you look to try and use one to maximise your take-home pay, you're likely to get questions from somewhere in your supply chain. You're more than likely going to get questions off your agency if you're inside of IR35 of who you're getting paid through, can you prove that they're a UK entity, copy of a payslip, etc., etc. So then you might get asked questions, so it's something to make sure that you're aware of in terms of that. The one good point from this is that after April next year, there is no liability at all on you if you're deemed outside of IR35. So the way these rules apply is that it's your responsibility and your liability from now up until the 5th of April. So all the tax during that period is your responsibility and your liability if you've got it wrong. After the 6th of April, if you get given a decision that you're outside of IR35, there is no liability on you as a contractor, no liability on your limited company at all. It all sits within that supply chain above you. It's no liability on you. So it's great news if you're outside of IR35 because there's no bad side. If you're inside, then obviously you need to look at a different working option. Yeah.
So after the 6th of April, if I'm being inside IR35, would they retrospectively claim, because I am, as of today, would be accountable for my
That's a really good question. Most people ask that question actually. What they said in the public sector change is that they wouldn't. So HMRC openly stated is they wouldn't look to use the results from these changes to then retrospectively look backwards at individual contractors' liabilities. Now HMRC don't always tell the truth and stick to what they said, so that's one problem. However, in 2.5 years now, we haven't seen ourselves, we look after 15,000 limited company contractors, we haven't seen anything where that's happened, where someone's been captured and they've gone backwards. And I mentioned this to someone before, they might come after you and they might get you for 50, 60, 70 grand's worth of tax over a 6-year period, where recently in the public sector, they've just fined NHS Digital 4.7 million. So it's a self-policing mechanism to push the compliance up the supply chain to the client, and then they'll investigate the end client, not you as an individual. So I think it's unlikely. You'd be unlucky for that to happen, I think, but they're not saying it couldn't as well. Okay. So a little bit on reasonable care. So far within the legislation, reasonable care hasn't been defined. So there is no definition. The only one so far is that the larger the size of the entity, the larger the hurdle of reasonable care is. So what they're saying is that if you've got a HR team, a legal team, you should be taking more reasonable care than a smaller business. The reasonable care definition, we have seen one so far. That's a first draft that's come out. So HMRC have issued a first draft to CBI, and we've seen a first draft of that now. And there are some points in there of what they're saying does constitute reasonable care. So clients should be using an accredited body if they're looking to outsource this, so someone that's relevant and understands the legislation if they do look to outsource it. They can assess on a role-by-role basis. So what I mean by that is rather than if you've got 20 IT developers and they're all working under one line manager in the same working environment, same working practices, they can assess that role, not for 20 individuals. So the only time you might think that you want to challenge that is if you've got multiple assignments or you've got things that you do in your limited company outside of that where you think you're different to the other contractors, then that might give you where you want to go back and challenge that decision. But clients can take a role-by-role assessment. And the other part of the reasonable care definition is that using CEST will classify as reasonable care as long as the person using it understands the questions and that the information input is correct. So there's some big caveats around using CEST, which I'll come on to in a second. One bit that missed in the private sector change actually is that there's an exclusion for small companies, so there's a small company exemption. So that's based on the size of your client, not you or your limited company, it's based on the size of the client that you provide services to. So if your client is a small entity under the Companies Act of 2006, then you don't need to worry about these changes, they don't need to worry about the changes, and the responsibility stays with you as an individual limited company contractor, so there's no change to how you are now effectively.
Did you define small company?
Yeah, so from the Companies Act 2006, the definition is under 50 employees, under £10.2 million turnover, and under £5.1 million assets. So I think there's rough figures out there to say that only 1% of contractors engage with a small business. The majority of them work with medium and large businesses. But obviously if you work for a small company now or you do in the future, then it's your decision, not their decision to make that assessment. So there is a small company exemption in there. There's supposed to be a bit of clarification coming out on that. There are a couple of bits around that are that if it's a small company that's part of a larger group, they'll look at the larger group size in terms of the group ownership of a small company. So it could be a small company that's owned by a big corporate, then they'd look at the big corporate in terms of that definition, so they wouldn't be a small company. Same as if they're a small UK business owned by a global large business, they'd look at the large business in terms of that assessment, not the small one. So it would have to be a small UK entity. Talk about CEST. Has everyone heard of CEST? Knows what it is? Yeah.
Just going to ask that.
Okay, so CEST stands for Check Employment Status for Tax. It's HMRC's own online tool. So they developed this back and launched it back in 2017. So it launched in the March of 2017. So if you go onto Google and type in HMRC CEST, you'll find their online tool. It's free to use, you can pop your details in and it will give you an output in terms of whether that tool thinks you're inside or outside of IR35. It's got some major flaws. So some of the major flaws, it's very heavily criticised. It's not just me that will criticise this tool, most people will do. One of the big problems with it is that HMRC, it's built on HMRC's understanding of case law. I mentioned before they lose 90% of cases, so 90% of the time they're wrong, and they built a tool based on their understanding. One issue. The tool is an algorithmic set of questions, so depending on which questions you answer, it takes you down different sets. So if you don't understand the question, you could miss out really important parts. And the tool will only give an outcome on about 80% of occasions. So if you use the tool, you'll get 80% of the time you'll get either inside or outside. 20% of contractors or clients will get, we can't make a determination, please call our helpline. So good luck calling HMRC in April and seeing what's happening.
And this is the tool the NHS used.
You're right, yes. So that was the next one in terms of HMRC are challenging their own tools. So when I mentioned NHS Digital had a large tax bill, I think it's about 4.7 million they made a provision in their accounts for. They used CEST from 2017 to 2019 to make assessments, and HMRC have challenged their own tool and said that the information input was incorrect. So if you don't input the information correctly, it doesn't stand. If you don't understand IR35 properly, it won't stand. So it's difficult. Another problem is that it doesn't account for mutuality of obligation. So I said there's 3 key tests for IR35 at the start, and in essence you only need to pass one of them to be outside of IR35. It completely ignores mutuality of obligation. HMRC's view on mutuality of obligation is completely different to case law and legislation. So it's a fundamentally flawed tool, but some people do use CEST in terms of doing an assessment. Yes, sir.
Can you just explain the mutuality of obligation, because it just seems a bit woolly to me. From what I've read from the previous slides, it looks the same whichever way you look at it. You look at it from our perspective as contractors or as an employee.
Yeah.
What's the difference? I'm missing something.
No, so as an employee, so me example, I've got a contract in perpetuity where I continue working for Brookson until I give them notice. So as a contractor, you will normally have a 6-month, a 9-month, a 12-month assignment, and it's whether, so 2 parts to it. So are you obliged to continue providing work after that date? So do you have a really long notice period? So anything less than kind of 4 weeks is normally okay. But do you have a really long notice period, or do you plan to carry on working for that client on an ongoing basis? Then that could be seen that you're mutually obliged with the client to give and receive work to each other. Second part is that if the other part of that is that you could be mutually obliged within a 3-month contract. So you could go in to do a project for 3 months, you finish it in 6 weeks. Ideally what you do then is you stop your contract and leave. If you complete that project in 6 weeks and then they say, oh, can you just help us with this? That's more of an employee relationship, because you're moving from project to project to project to project. So when you're looking at mutuality of obligation, the way to get around that, the best way, is that if you, in that instance, you've got a 3-month project, you complete it in 6 months and they say, can you help us with this? I can, but I need a new contract. So you need a new contract at that point to complete the next stage of that work, and that way you're making sure that you're getting an individual contract for each piece of work you do. Where me as an employee, they might say to me, Brookson might say to me one day, you're going to go and do this today, or you're doing this today, or staff that work within my team, I might be saying, this day you're going there, you're going there, you're doing this, you're doing this. They have to go and do that, where you as a contractor could say, well, that's not in my job description, I'm not doing that. Yeah. It's different in terms of, so what you look at is it's a business-to-business relationship. So I can turn around to my builder and say, I want you to clean the windows. So it's not my job, that's not what I signed the contract for. That's the difference between employed and self-employed and mutuality of obligation. Yeah, is that okay?
That means that we need to tell that employee that to make a new contract with the new terms of agreement along with your nature of work and everything.
So that would be the ideal way of doing it. So because if you've got say for example you've got a 12-month contract and you finish all of what was detailed within that project early, and they say we're just going to move you and lift you onto this project, it looks like you're mutually obliged to continue providing work services. Really, you should have another contract, whether it's the same length or a different length.
If there is an extension, that is
yeah, but it can be an extension under a different role, a different job profile, a different assignment schedule, however you want to do that. Okay, no problem. I think I've covered everything around CEST.
Quick question on the same thing. Suppose the actual work is something which will not be finished actually in 3 months. It will take at least 3 years to finish that piece of work.
Yeah.
But the contract in writing now, as of today, exists only for 3 months. And there is an obligation that will be extended beyond 3 months for every 3 months.
Yeah, so you'd probably be better just having a contract for the 3 years. The problem would be that you can't claim expense relief on your travel then. But actually,
ignoring that bit.
Yeah, so if it's written down that you're obliged to continue providing services, you're not going to pass a mutuality of obligation.
Yeah.
If it's just that you know that you're likely to carry on, probably okay. Yeah, there's a difference between the two. But if your client you're working for says, we know he's going to carry on, we're going to fail him on that part, and that could cause you a problem in that essence. But you could, at the end of 3 months, you could turn around and say, I'm not doing the next 3 months.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there you go. That passes the mutuality obligation straight away. So you've got a choice not to do it. That's the whole point. Is that I haven't got a choice. I've got to until I get notice. You can decide when you want to do and not do projects. You can take 3 months off over Christmas, etc. If you want to.
What if you had a break at the end of your contract for a month?
A lot of people ask.
A different contract for the next term.
Yeah, so a lot of people ask that, and it needs to be a genuine break, not just a holiday from one assignment and then go back to the same client completing the same thing, really. But a lot of people do say that, I'm just going to take 4 weeks off in between each assignment. It's probably going to be viewed differently, I imagine, if HMRC investigates. I don't think your client would like that either. I think your client would want you to do the right thing and do the assessment correctly as well. Okay. Yes.
Has anyone you talk to considered doing contracts under statements of work? And is there the possibility for contractors to engage with a single client under multiple statements of work at the same time?
Yes, a statement of work, I suppose, is not something new. It seems to be the new phrase at the moment that people want to use, but contractors and outsourced service providers will have been using statements of work or statement of work contracts for many years. So it doesn't immediately get you outside of IR35. If you're engaged on a statement of work where you're delivering a project and you've got set deliverables, set timescales and a set price, it's much stronger. You're very, very likely to be outside of IR35 because you've got financial risk, there's no mutuality obligation, there's less control, you've got defined projects, it ticks all the boxes very quickly. However, if you look on HMRC sets tool now, is they've got 2 disclaimers on there. One is around if you input information incorrectly, they won't stand by it, so it's not reasonable care. The second one is if you're working through a contrived or manipulated contract, then that won't be looked at favourably either. So the same thing is if it's a true statement of work, yes, it's very good. If it's a manipulated contract just to make it look like that, which some people consider the right way of doing it, it would be looked at dimly again by HMRC. And what's likely to happen is that they'll ignore that and just go straight after the client anyway. They're likely to ignore that statement of work contract and say this is just a time and materials basis. So if you've still got a 6-month contract on £500 a day where you put some deliverables within there, it's not a true statement of work. True statement of work saying deliver this project and you'll get paid £30,000 and you can deliver that in 2 weeks, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. There's not really a time frame, it's much more around a specific project. If you look at the way that a lot of the IT MSPs will work, is that they do that in terms of an outsourced project. They say, we will come and develop that bit of your website for you or install this piece of kit for you, and we'll send any contract on any given day and we'll give you 5 people that will do that, but it doesn't have to be these 5 people here, it could be these 5 people here. That's again a true outsourced service, a true statement of work, and what that does for that MSP is it makes the managed service provider the client. So for example, IT MSP is providing services to a bank. It's not the bank that makes that decision in terms of IR35, it would be the IT managed service provider. So it moves the definition of client downwards, the statements of work will move that to the person that's engaged in the PSC. The reason being is that the contract between the IT MSP and the bank is a contract for services. It's not delivering people, it's delivering a service, so that IR35 doesn't apply there.
Sorry, a question going back to mutuality of obligation, but I'm afraid it's not really a question for itself, it's for InterQuest. So you mentioned there that, let's say you take on a brand new project, or a project as well as on top of what you're doing at the moment. Does anyone actually come to you guys and actually have contractual data to say, I'm now doing this project on top of this one, or something else entirely?
It's a really good question. Not so much now, but we foresee that will be the workforce. That's how it will go in the next 5 years. You'll be doing 3 days work somewhere and 2 days somewhere else. And we're actually talking to clients. That's what we foresee the labour workforce will be in the future.
Yeah, I completely agree, and that's probably the way it will. the most likely way of this working is that the people that are true disguised employees that should be PAYE will end up going down the PAYE route. The ones that are true outside contractors probably end up working that sort of way, because that's the true way you'd normally engage with the businesses, that you have them for deliver projects rather than come on a seat. So it's all around education, isn't it? So if your client at the moment is saying you need to sit there, do this, do this, do this, do this, do they have to do that? They don't have to tell you what to do all day, every day. They don't have to control you. They don't have to treat you in certain ways and make you wear the same colour lanyards or staff badges or go for Christmas do. They can change those processes. So very much it's around educating your own clients and making sure they're aware of how they can change their working practices. A lot of the time when we're speaking to any clients, it's around bad engagement terms from them. So they're treating. So one client we met with was doing weekly and monthly appraisals and one-to-ones. Should not be doing that with contractors. They're putting them bang inside IR35 when actually they don't need to do that if they've got projects and deliverables in their contract and they're holding to that. Okay.
Yeah, so whereabouts on the assessment does it mention the fact that contractors don't receive the same type of benefits as an employee? Because you've got your things like your sick pay, your pension, your car, your fuel cards, etc. That somebody at my level would get a standard for the role that I'm doing as a contract resource. So I'm working alongside people that get all those benefits. So I can prove that. But whereabouts on that assessment do I?
Doesn't normally. So the reason being is that when you sign a contract to be a limited company contractor, you normally opt out of things like the conduct regs and AWR, which are the agency workers regulations, meaning you should have comparable benefits and pay. But because you're a limited company contractor, you opt out of them because they're a negative thing for IR35. So as a limited company contractor, you shouldn't be getting benefits. I don't think the assessed it has that actually. I don't think it has that question.
So when HMRC is updating the assessed tool, are they taking that into consideration?
No. So they just
because if I'm not getting the company car park, as an example, people who are permanent employees might be getting free car park and I won't get that.
Yeah, so it's unlikely those type of things are going to put you outside of IR35 if all the other tests put you inside. That's the problem. So if you would failed control, mutuality of obligation and substitution, but if you didn't have access to that car park, you probably should be an employee and claim for employment rights. It's the other way round, where they're added benefits that if you're already probably either outside of IR35 or on the cusp, some of those things could swing it in your favour in terms of making it look more like a business-to-business employment. The HMRC are updating sets. They said they'd update it by the end of the year and they released it this week. Haven't really made any changes, so they've simplified some of the questions to make it easy to understand. It still doesn't take into account mutuality of obligation. And it doesn't output a status determination statement, which the legislation states the client needs, so it's still not fit for purpose really. The latest release was out this week. There's a big disclaimer on their website if you go on there now around having the right information input on the which stand by it.
On the previous slide you mentioned that there were 650,000 ACs at the moment. So they were not expecting to get that tax back. So they not thought that perhaps that might slip by 50% perhaps, and those 50% will take on the normal employment as opposed to being self-employed.
Yeah, so their calculations are based on there being 650,000 PSCs. I think they estimate 36 or 37%, I think that's I'm not sure, are taxing themselves inappropriately. That equates to about 175,000 contractors. They then work that back into how much tax that will give them each year, additional tax. It doesn't take into consideration loss of corporation tax, so you might get PAYE tax, but you're not going to be getting corporation tax from those companies anymore, are you? You won't be getting the VAT income from those companies anymore. So you're a full-time employee, you're a PAYE.
There will be no corporation tax on if you...
You're not PAYE, no. So you wouldn't have to pay corporation tax, you have to pay PAYE tax and national insurance instead. So it works out. I've got some take-home examples of that in a second as well. But yes, their calculations of 1.3 billion is looking at how much extra tax they'll get, not where they're going to lose it. Still, they're going to rob from Peter, pay Paul.
Like business case.
Yeah, but actually, if all you guys didn't pay corporation tax, how much money do they lose? That would be taken from how much they're going to recoup, but that's not taken into consideration normally. Couple of kind of examples of case law in terms of, I suppose the main reason for this is showing that you don't have to pass all the tests to be outside of IR35, and to give you some examples of kind of how that works in practice. So Lorraine Kelly, really high profile case, she passed on all those tests. If you run it, when it got ran through the CES tool, the case notes afterwards, it said she was inside, so again it gave the wrong determination. She could provide a substitute. She had control over her working practices in terms of she could decide which guests she had on the show, what questions she asked them. So she might have been controlled in terms of she had to sit in front of a camera and perform a job and where she had to do it, but actually she had control in the manner that she carried out her work. So looking at the working practices is really important.
So, in the case of Lorraine Kelly, what sort of instigated? Was she under investigation?
She went to tribunal, yeah.
So what instigated that? Even though like she's got obviously green for every point in that. Like what prompted?
So HMRC have been going to beat quite high profile celebrities. So the first one that was probably a big inside fail was Krista Ackroyd, a newsreader. She got done for about £430,000 worth of back tax.
That's the one going.
So she's going to appeal. Yeah. If you read the case notes, I think she's going to need to appeal, but unless she's got something fundamentally different to say. So the key difference between Lorraine Kelly and Krista Ackroyd is Lorraine Kelly passed on all of those, so was outside of IR35. You think Krista Ackroyd is very similar. She was doing the same job for 7 years. She's a newsreader, so she's told what to read, when to say it. So in the manner that she carries out her work, she's controlled. I don't think she can provide a substitute. So really difficult for her to prove that she's outside of R35, very difficult. But actually there's case law where people have passed just on mutuality of obligation. There's a tribunal where a HGV driver passed just on mutuality of obligation. So a HGV driver cannot provide a substitute. Then it's insured and can drive a vehicle. They're controlled, told when and where to go and when to deliver. But someone did pass an IR35 tribunal just based on the mutuality of obligation point. So there is arguments there to say you only have to pass one. It's better if you pass more and it's looked at on the overall picture instead. And again, the way that we do that is we break that down not just into the 3 tests, but a lot more detailed. And then we'd normally rag status them in terms of a red, amber and green. So you might be high risk, low risk or medium risk.
So that's what I've looked for in the past. It's like I've never been able to find the line where I'm in or out.
Yeah, it's really difficult. Yeah, it's so difficult. And that's where things like the CES tool and companies that don't understand IR35, that are now IR35 experts, shouldn't be talking about it. You need to use someone that's been doing this for a long time and understands it properly. It's quite a niche area of employment law. It's not a traditional sort of area of employment law. Normally because there's not a big market for it. So the only reason we had Brookson Legal is that we founded it to help our contractors at the time. So anyone that uses our accountancy gets IR35 reviews through Brookson Legal. That's why we did it. So it's just been sat in the background providing services to our contractors. But then obviously over the last couple of years, as these changes have come, we've been able to add a little bit of value to contractors, agencies, clients in terms of what we can help do. And we're helping with some audits, and I've got some examples of that as well. Might be next actually. No. So take-home pay difference. If you take Lucy, for example, £50 an hour, £400 a day roughly, rough sort of take-home pay difference. Through a limited company, you'd be expecting to take home roughly 80% minimum. So you'd be around about £1,600 per week. Through the umbrella, PAYE would be just over £1,100. So quite a big difference in terms of take-home pay. If you go on to our website, so for Brookson One, so brookson1.co.uk, there's a slide bar calculator, so you can slide up and down for your rate of pay, and it tells the difference between the 2 rates of pay, so you can see what the difference is. Obviously, they're just example numbers. If you want a bespoke illustration, we can do that for you. Well, probably the main reason why you're here and concerned is that in terms of take-home pay. Skip past that one and use this one instead. So the reason for this slide, and the reason I've left it in, is to talk to you around some of the different working options, and I go into a little bit more detail on it later. So when we talk to end pilots, we talk to them around the different ways that they might look to engage contractors post-April next year. So if they've done the review and they're outside of IR35, they're this side of this, absolutely no change. So they've done a review on all the contractors, they're happy with all your working practices, and they've decided that you're outside of IR35, you continue to get paid gross. Happy days, no risk on you, and you still get gross pay. So brilliant. If you've been deemed inside of IR35 and you fall onto that right-hand side of the screen, then your client has a range of options available to them. They could decide that they are going to pay you PAYE to your limited company, or the agency might be able to do that for you. It's called a deemed calculation or deemed payroll. But someone there would obviously need to pick up the employer's NIC. They might put you on their payroll, but that they're likely to incur costs around employee benefits and employer's NI again. They might push you down an umbrella or an outsourced PAYE route, but that means you're probably going to reduce your take-home pay by employer's NI, PAYE and employer's NI, because it comes out to be gross rate. Your rate of pay is £50 an hour, for example, has all those bits deducted out of it. It's a fully rolled up rate of pay. Or, on a nice scenario, they might decide to pay you PAYE and fully compensate you for all the tax, so give you a rate increase. Now, obviously, the far right option would be the nice version, because they paid all the tax and you're no worse off. The problem is that costs them about an extra 20% to do that. So not many clients are going to be able to afford to give all their contractor base an uplifted rate of 20%. We saw some of it in the public sector where they needed contractors desperately to finish contracts, that type of stuff. They might look to do something like that, or they might look to split the difference. But what you'll find is that in probably January, February, March time, when they start to communicate with you and your agency around whether you're inside or outside, they'll then start communicating options like we've seen already from the banks. The banks have come out quite early and said, or 5 or 6 of the banks so far have come out quite early and said, we're going to change our engagement model. Everyone has to go down the PAYE route. One of the banks has come out and openly stated that you cannot use umbrella, you have to be PAYE, so they don't want any third-party payroll in the chain at all. They want it, either them or the agency, to put you down a PAYE route. So some of them are being quite strict at enforcing their supply chain as well. Okay, so working options in a little bit more detail. Again, if you're on the right-hand side of the screen, you don't need to worry. So if you get a contract, or like you did 2 gentlemen before in the public sector, you get told that your new role is outside of IR35, you can either continue working that way, or you can set up a limited company and continue to be the most tax efficient way of working. If you're inside of IR35, then these are the range of options that we've developed for our customers. There'll be different options out there, but these are all UK PAYE tax and NI compliant. So an umbrella solution is an outsourced employment business. We employ you, all tax and NI is accounted for, you get a pay slip, you get employee benefits, but all the PAYE tax and I is paid, but it's a lesser take-home pay. Average take-home pay PAYE is 60-65%, limited companies 80-85%, so that's where the difference comes from. The deemed payroll I mentioned before, that's getting paid net into your limited company. So at the moment you all get paid gross into your limited company. So you might get paid £2,000 a week into your limited company. You can get paid deemed into your limited company, or deemed payroll, which means that the person paying you will have deducted tax and national insurance before they pay you. So that means that £2,000 won't be a gross payment coming to you, it will be a net payment that goes into your business bank account. But then you don't obviously have to pay corporation tax, and also if you're registered for VAT, they'll pay you the VAT amount, and you're still responsible for the VAT.
How would you withdraw that from your limited company?
You can withdraw it all, so I can't remember the exact terminology for it now, I think I can get the information, but effectively it's like being paid into your personal bank account. There really isn't any other expenses to be paid, apart from probably your accountancy fee that you need to pay out of there. So all the tax and I has been paid.
You're not affected by dividends either?
No, I don't believe so, no, because then you're in your class as an employer or worker, and you're not a limited company director anymore, your class as a worker, so you have worker rights, so you just be paid a net payment. You should be able to withdraw all of it, or pretty much all of it, put into your accountancy fee. So if you were going to have roles that are inside and outside, good option, so you could get paid net and gross into your limited company and flip between the 2 payment types, and your accountant should be able to account for the 2 of them. If you were going to do a contract for 3 or 4 months, where you thought it's going to be inside, there's a couple more options open to you. So the 2 other solutions that we've come up with to try and help contractors, so at the moment you might be paying your accountants £1,500, £2,000 a year, whatever you pay them currently to do your accounts for you, and your back returns and PAYE returns and everything else they do for you. If you then got told you have to use a PAYE solution and use an umbrella company, that umbrella company will retain a margin for doing that. On average, it's about £20 roughly per week before tax. We do that, so we offer an umbrella solution and a limited company solution. What we've decided to do is put the 2 together, so that's the free flex option. So where contractors are having roles that are inside IR35, outside of IR35, it allows them the flexibility to move between the 2 products. So the benefit of having both products rather than having an accountancy and then having to get an umbrella company and then flip back to your accountancy, you've just got one service that flips between the 2 effectively. You might, if you're going to be captured in terms of IR35 for a long period of time, 6 months for example, you might want to put your limited company into a non-trade or a dormant status. So you want to speak to your accountant around reduced fees, putting your limited company into a dormancy status, reduces your accountancy fees, keeps your costs down, and you can work tax efficiently through the umbrella instead. If you're going to be continuously captured, you know you're always going to be inside of IR35, you're not going to get roles that are outside of IR35 in the future, the best advice would be to close your limited company down in the most tax efficient way, because there isn't really any other benefit of working for your limited company. However, if you've been contracting for a long time, over a long period of time, you might have a good build-up of funds in your account, so you want to withdraw them in the most tax efficient way. So don't just go and close your limited company down, make sure you take some specific tax advice on how to do that. If you've got a larger, or over £20,000 in your account, you probably want to go down something called an MVL, a member voluntary liquidation. It's the most tax efficient way of closing your company down and withdrawing the funds. However, word of warning, if you do that, you can't then phoenix another company. you need to wait 2 years before you can open another company in the same service line. So don't do it unless you're actually genuinely always going to be captured from an IR35 point of view. Other options are you might want to keep your limited company open and put all of your earnings into a pension, or just carry on working that way.
You just said the word pension.
Yes.
I take pension out of my PSC account, and obviously it doesn't attract any corporation tax. How would that work? So in this inside IR35?
So it's bad news, unfortunately. It's a net payment into your limited company, so you wouldn't be able to do that anymore. So because that example of the £2,000 a week gross, so the person paying you, so the agency or the end hirer, is going to deduct all the tax and national insurance before they pay you. So they're going to pay you net, so there's then no option to put a salary sacrifice pension that way. I think that it's one of the things that one of our financial service teams are looking at to see if there's anything they can do. I think at the moment that it's just a net payment into
I think if you put pension payment in net of tax, you can then top it up.
Okay.
I think you have to take that route.
Yeah, so your accountant might be able to give you a bit more specific advice, or one of our financial advisors will be able to do that as well and give you a bit more specific advice on it. I'm not pensions expert, unfortunately. I know the net payments into your limited company is obviously you have to do the kind of sacrifice there to save the tax. If you're working through an umbrella company, a lot of them are now starting to offer salary sacrifice pensions, so you can continue topping up your pension that way. But obviously it is PAYE tax through an umbrella company as well. Okay. A couple of case studies in terms of what it is that we've done with end hirers. So the reason I popped that up there is that if you're starting to speak to your end clients now, if they're starting to communicate with you about IR35 and they're not 100% sure, or they're not talking to you at all and you want someone to speak to them, we're happy to do that. We're working with about 45, 50 end hirers that we're already doing an audit with. And there's a couple of them examples on the screen there. So the way that we normally go about doing that is probably the first stage is probably quite similar to something like CEST, where it does an overall review and comes up with 3 outcomes. So we'll do the initial review, which is done by legal professionals, not an online tool, and we'll come back with 3 options. We'll either come back with you're outside of IR35, the role's inside of IR35, or we come back with what we call a caution, which is the amber section of a RAG status. That means that certain changes need to happen to working practices for those contractors to continue being outside of IR35. So the bit where we add most value to your clients is that we can give them legal advice on how they can change their working practices. So the company I spoke about before that's doing one-to-ones and appraisals and staff parking, etc., 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 the advice is to change those working practices. If they change their working practices, those contractors are truly outside of IR35. If they don't, then they're going to have to go inside of IR35. So it's down to your client's flexibility and choice then. But the benefit of using our service rather than CEST is that we'll give some proactive advice around how they can change their working practices and educate them a little bit. A couple of examples on there. Company A, quite a big site, you would think quite a big company with 2,500 contractors. A couple of thousand of those were drivers, so very high risk. Need to go down the PAYE route, where the over 500 were able to do assessments on those. So we can kind of carve them up a little bit and help them out. So it's not a case that we can't deal with the size, I suppose. In terms of how we do that, so the education session, so I mentioned we're happy to speak to your hirer. So the education session like this, I suppose, is free for any end hirers that you want us to speak to. So if you want us to come out and see them or speak to them, or they're willing to engage with us, we're quite happy to have a conference call and speak to them, and we deal with companies of all sizes. I think the smallest we deal with is 3 contractors they've got. The largest is 5,000 or 6,000, so we deal with anyone kind of in between that scale. Sometimes it's just an education piece where we can help point them down the right route, and they might just decide to do it properly. Our main aim there is really trying to stop them taking a blanket PAYE decision. I said before, we've got 15,000 limited company contractors that we don't want putting inside of IR35. We want to be able to continue providing accountancy services to them, so we're hoping that we can educate the market in that way. Once we've done that education process, if your end hirer then decided to want to engage Brookson Legal, they can. The advice we give them is protected under professional indemnity insurance, and we can do all the audits and reviews for them and give them some advice on how to do that, but that's down to your client. And people will choose to use a range of providers for that. They might use EY, PwC, KPMG, they might use us, they might use CEST. It's down to your client how they decide to assess that. The most important thing, I suppose, is that they don't go down sort of the blanket ban route. And then there's a bit of information on why Brookson, but I won't go through that, I'll leave that up there. So if you've got any more questions, it's been quite a quiet audience so far, so ask away.
Have you ever heard of 2 contractors working in separate companies but doing pretty much the same role, using their substitution clause to like swap clients for a day.
So not that, no. There was a tribunal about 12 months ago, I think, where there was 2 directors of the same limited company, and they were substituting in and out of different clients. And HMRC still tried to take them to tribunal. They lost. They did take them to tribunal, but it was one limited company, 2 directors doing the exact same job, so yeah, 2 IT analysts, and they were substituting in and out of different clients. And the HMRC still tried to investigate, even though they clearly passed the substitution clause, and they lost at tribunal. So it does happen. One of the things that we do hear a little bit of is that some people say, no, I'm going to put together 5, 6, 7 like-minded types of people and try and do that to a small business. Be really careful with it. So one, depends how you structure the business, it can be seen as tax avoidance. So if you're just doing it to take advantage of the employer's NI relief and bits and pieces like that, then it can be seen as tax avoidance. So you be one a little bit careful around that, is that you don't get got into that pigeonhole in HMRC. And the second is that around the liability flow, is if the client knows you're doing that, they might be a little nervous around it as well, because obviously any non-compliance can come back up the chain and bite the client, so they might be nervous, so it needs to be a little bit careful. It needs to be a true business like that.
My contract's inside IR35. I work for an agency. Is it up to the agent to pay the tax at NI and just give you a pay statement?
So it depends on the agency you work for, how they choose to pay you. So some agencies can't or don't offer a PAYE service, so they would normally recommend you use an umbrella company at that point. So if you use an umbrella company, the umbrella company employs you, gives you a pay slip, deducts all the tax and NI. Normally you get your holiday pay as you get your paid, rolled up.
The agent works directly for the clients.
Yeah.
I work for the umbrella company.
Yeah.
The umbrella company works.
It's an overarching terms of business, yeah. So there's a contract between the umbrella company and the agency that flows up the chain to the client effectively. So the contracts flow up and flow down that chain. So there's an overarching terms of business normally between the agency and the umbrella company. But the umbrella company employs you as a contractor, so all your employment rights sit with the umbrella company. Main benefits are is that if you do, so for example, you were always going to be captured, and you did 3 months, 3 months, 3 months, 3 months, and you moved agency each time, you wouldn't gain any employment rights. Your pension might be with different people all the time. You go with an umbrella company, you get continuous employment for the full 12 months, you get the same pension all the way through the 12 months, and you get all your holiday pay paid when paid as you go through it, rather than accruing it and not getting it. There's a few benefits, not massively financially beneficial. There was a change to umbrella legislation back in 2016 where previous to that change in 2016, umbrella employees used to be able to claim tax relief on their site-to-site travel, overnight subsistence hotels. HMRC make a change to bits of legislation every year, and that was the one that got impacted in 2016. So you now have to pass an SDC test with the umbrella company. So if you pass the supervision, direction and control test with the umbrella company, you can then claim AMAPs on a weekly basis, which are authorised mileage and allowance payments. That's mileage and parking, basically. And then at the end of the year, you can claim some other stuff, but it's not as financially beneficial as it used to be working through an umbrella company. But it is still still probably one of the easiest ways of working if you're going to be doing lots of different contracts. No. Again, it goes back to that working option. So if you flip back up to that one. So, for example, you're going to do a 3-month assignment and you're definitely going to be inside of IR35. Well, then you know in 3 months you're going to change assignment and look for an outside role. You could do that, or one of these here probably is that you're either going to pay for your limited company to keep it open and put it into a dormant status and use an umbrella company, or you're going to get paid net into your limited company. And then at the end of that 3-month period, you then get your next assignment, and it's outside of IR35, and then get paid gross into limited company again. If you're always going to be captured, so if you're going to be 3 months, 3 months, 3 months, and they're all inside, the best option is to close the limited company down, or use it for something else, move the money into your pension, however you want to do that. If you've got a lot of money in there, then you might want to find the most tax efficient way of removing that money, I suppose. But we do find we've still got contractors that work with us from the public sector changes that are on the Dean's payroll, because they like the fact of being a director of a limited company. They like having the limited company. They might have other things that go through that limited company. So there are some people that still do work in that way, where they get paid net into their limited company. So it's down to your choice, really. The only difference with that is if your client says something different. So that one bank that's adamant you've got to pay PAYE tax, then you wouldn't have the option to even work for your limited company net for that one. Yep.
Can I ask you to go back to the financial implications slide? One.
That one?
Yeah, that one. So, based upon your experience within the private sector, working with end clients, where are you seeing the majority of them going, or left versus right?
So, thank you. Yeah, no, it's really mixed. So the two on the left-hand side is, so when I spoke before around us doing the initial assessment and we get a red, amber and green, that's the green and the amber. So the green is they're outside of IR35, the amber is implement changes to make sure that you're still outside of IR35. So it could be that we've done a review on your role and we think there's 5 or 6 things here that needs to be changed and amended. Can your client amend and change them? So can they change the way they engage with you? Can they remove the 9 to 5 working hours out of your contract? Can they remove the fixed location? Silly little things like that could make a difference.
And are they taking that on board? Because this one I see of banking on the majority of clients or end businesses going, can't be bothered with this, and I'm not going to take a risk.
Yeah,
Which is what the banks are doing.
I'm not quite so sure that they're looking to hope that people just say they can't be bothered. I think they're trying to pinch off the bottom part of the contractor market that are non-compliant. So I imagine most of the people in this room are quite highly skilled, highly paid workers that are hired for their set of skills. That's normally what happens in an IT contractor, is that you've got a specialist set of skills, can't get as a permanent employee, so they hire a contractor. Where we see a lot of non-compliance, so in the public sector, there was doctors, nurses, junior assistant types working through PSCs. They shouldn't have been working that way. They were working overtime shifts, working PAYE one way and limited company the other. They're captured from an IR35 point of view. In the private sector, there's quite a lot of drivers, couriers, HGV drivers that work through personal service companies. They're really going to struggle. They're very high risk. So I think HMRC are looking for that level of non-compliance. In theory, the higher the paid, the higher the skilled, as long as your client makes a reasonable decision and takes a reasonable assessment, they should be okay from that. But what we're seeing is a massive range across there. So out of all the clients that we've met, spoken, and presented to, very few have gone down the blanket PAYE route. So I think probably only a couple of the banks that we've spoken to that then decided it was too much work, or they decided, whatever reason they decided to go down that PAYE route for. There's then a variation of that where, because if you're at that side of the chart, you don't need to make any changes. That's really easy. So if they've got 70% of their workers that are outside of IR35, they've only got 30% that they've got to decide how they're going to pay, and then they might look at the contract roles and think, I'm going to have to give an uplifted rate to that one because it's vitally important, where we might not with that one. TfL, for example, did that, where they graded some of their roles on importance and then tried to uplift some of the rates for the ones that they really needed to keep. So it will vary dependent on client to client. Questions?
Sorry, I just want to. I'm currently contracting to these guys who are doing a delivery of service contract for DWP.
Okay.
Now, I think the total number of employees is about 80. Maybe
that's including contractors there, I believe, isn't it? I think that's including contractors.
It's a mixture of contractors and permanent.
Yeah. So
we've sent Hippo sent a team of people into the DWP.
Yeah.
Now I think that is a sort of, we see more contractors trying to discount.
Yeah, so that's your traditional statement of work, isn't it? So the DWP then outsource a project to Hippo Digital. Yeah. So if that's a true outsource statement of work, it's Hippo Digital decision to make on the IR35 status. Yeah. I think Hippo might actually be verging on the small category, so it might still be your determination next year. You need to get guidance from Hippo on that, but the determination for the size of the company is based on their full-time employees and full-time equivalents, the FTE. So contractors, so limited company contractors wouldn't be included in that. If you're a PAYE contractor with on a fixed-term contract, they would be. So it's who's on payroll, basically. So the limited company contractors would set outside of that. So they might have 49 employees, 50 contractors, 49 employees.
It works quite well for them, doesn't it?
It does, yeah, and there's lots of design consultancies, IT consultancies, MSPs around that will fall maybe into the smaller bracket. There's lots of them that work on that outsourced service. So as long as it's a true outsourced service, like the gentleman asked before, it works exactly the same, isn't it? So the bank has asked for a design piece of work to be done, they want this project done, they're outsourcing the whole project. They're not saying, give me Bob, Phil and Jill to come and deliver this for me. They're not asking for bums on seats, time and materials, they're asking for a service instead. So then it becomes Hippo Digital's or that client's decision to make on IR35, not the actual end user of the service.
So in that case, does it matter where Hippo get their results from? Whether they're FTEs or contractors?
So the only difference it makes for them in terms of FTEs is that it would count towards the size of their company for a small company exemption. So if they start taking on more employees, then we'll have to breach that 50 limit. But you've got to pass 2 out of 3 anyway, so they could breach on the other 2 in terms of example. So.
But in that scenario as well, the end client can't dictate where the resource comes from, can they?
So again, it will depend on what the client tries to enforce, so we've heard, I don't know if it is true, that one of the other banks has said that they're enforcing PAYE for their contractors and anyone else in their supply chain, so any outsourced services, they're trying to push PAYE all the way down that supply chain. I don't know if that's true, it's just a rumour that we've heard, which if it is, isn't great, but in theory they shouldn't be allowed to do that, but they can, because they can say, well, you're delivering me a service, I want to know that everyone's paying tax, so they're trying to be uber compliant, but they shouldn't do, no, so they should be saying, this is an outsourced service, it's not my problem, it's your problem to sort, so company A contracts to company B, it's company B's decision. Any more?
First story, can we confirm a small company is 50 people or turnover?
So under 50 staff, so less than, or not more than 50 people, not more than £10.2 million turnover, and not more than £5.1 million assets on the balance sheet.
5.1?
5.1 million assets on balance sheet. So they would need to pass 2 out of those 3. So they could have £100 million turnover, pass on the other 2, 10 employees, and something else. So yeah, that's the prime dependent on how they pass that. And it's the client's responsibility to make that determination of when they're small. Just for reference, actually, might be useful is that if they're a small company now, and so that you don't have to, so you won't have to worry about this for next tax year. So they'll decide that you make the decision. If they then become a medium-sized business, so they pass that threshold next year, these rules will apply from the start of the next tax year. So they would then have to make a determination by April 2021 for the year after or the year after. So it's not a permanent out, it's a stay of execution effectively. So while you're in that small category, it stays like that. As soon as they pass that category, then they do need to make a determination. Any more questions?
Yeah, I know you haven't got a crystal ball, but what's going to happen next?
So many people ask that, and to be fair, the difficulty is that if you think around, so we should have had draft legislation on November the 6th when the autumn statement was supposed to be announced, they cancelled it, so we haven't had the draft legislation. They now called an election on the 12th of December. Liberal Democrats have openly stated they want to stop this if they get in. Labour have said they'll review it, and Conservatives have said nothing, it's their policy. So always fun. So the government turmoil could have an effect on this, and the obviously Brexit, if it ever happens on the 31st of January, could have an impact on it. The one thing we do know is that we've met with HMRC and other companies have met with HMRC, and they are adamant this is coming next year. So they've said our plans are still to roll this out next year. So that we've heard no rumours from them at all that this is not coming. So we're continuing to try and prepare for it as best we can prior to it coming. So absolutely, there could be, the Liberal Democrats could win. It's unlikely, but they could, you never know. I tell enough contractors they're going to cancel IR35, it might work. But if Liberal Democrats get in, they've said that they'll stop this. But if they stop that, where are they going to get the 1.3 billion from? So I think Labour said they'd review it, but I'm pretty sure in their manifesto they also said they're going to put corporation tax up to the highest level in Europe. The highest level currently is 32%. So you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, aren't you? It's then not beneficial to work for a limited company at all, rather than it being beneficial in some way. So my view, it should happen, but it needs to be rolled out properly, because actually it stops the non-compliance in that supply chain. So the people that shouldn't be working that way pay the right level of tax. The people that are true contractors continue exactly as you are with no risk, which is the right way of it working. If someone comes in, stops it, but then whacks up corporation tax, that affects everyone, even the people that are true contractors. So it's probably the best of two evils. My view is, I think it will come in April. I'd be highly surprised if it stopped. And it will depend on your clients, what happens along that spectrum of where you go. If your client's open to the conversation, most that we're speaking to are really open around how can we change our working practices legitimately. It has to be legitimately. You can't just say we're going to put everyone on a statement of work to get them outside. That doesn't work. We'll give them correct legal advice to make sure they fall outside.
Everybody still needs to get stuff done, don't they?
Yeah, and rapidly running out of time as well. You think is it December? It's not quite December yet, is it? I think it's next week. You think then only a few weeks till Christmas, 3-4 weeks till Christmas. Not much is going to get done between now and December. If someone come to us now and say, "Can you do us an audit?" We're booked up nearly till the middle of January. It's really busy. So as you can imagine, as that goes on, people are going to get closer and closer and closer. So if companies don't start acting soon, they're going to be getting towards February, March, April, and that's where they tend to make knee-jerky type reactions. What we saw in the public sector was that a lot of companies did take knee-jerk reactions, but then over a period of time we saw it very much come back. So, like I think the gentleman's gone, but you mentioned before you got given an outside very straight after the legislation, that would have been really rare, where we were seeing people on £900 a day that were captured, where now you're actually starting to see people outside of IR35. So I think it'll be our view is that it'll be a bit of a storm for probably 3 to 6 months, and then it'll start to get a little bit more back to normal, and people will learn how to do it correctly. Yes?
Right, this is a question for you and for InterQuest. Is there anything under the legislation that takes a view on the position where contractors are working multiple contracts at a time, but doing things that permanent workers do? So you're acting as a permanent worker, but you're effectively part-time with 3 different contractors. That's rare, but
yeah. So you'd review each one individually, so each assignment individually, and it'd be reviewed. So just because you're working for different clients doesn't necessarily mean it put you outside of IR35. No. So they review each one. So if you were very much doing a full-time equivalence job, or you're recovering for someone's maternity, that type of stuff, you're going to be very high risk from an IR35 point of view. But if you could have assignments where you could work 3 days for one client and be outside, and 2 days for one and be inside. You can have that. So that could happen. But you could have 5 different engagements in a week, and one be in, one be out, one be in, one be out. It could be completely different. So it does really vary. You have to review each assignment and each role on its own merit. It's not so much based on you, but a lot of that is based down to how the client will engage with you as a contractor. If they're willing to change how they engage with you, then it might be able to get that role outside of IR35 then legitimately as well. Well, I'm around for a little bit. If you've got any questions individually, then feel free to come and see me. If you want any more advice, or you want to speak to your client, then get in touch. I'm happy to help. Thank you very much.